Good evening, and welcome to your comprehensive roundup of the day's top stories from the United States and Canada on this crisp November 6, 2025. As we reflect on a politically charged week, let's start with the electrifying results from yesterday's off-year elections across the U.S., which saw an unprecedented surge in voter turnout, estimated at over 45% in key battleground states, the highest for non-presidential cycles in 2 decades. Democrats emerged as the clear victors, flipping 2 crucial gubernatorial seats in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, where candidates campaigned fiercely on promises to expand affordable housing and combat climate-driven wildfires that have ravaged the Midwest this summer. In a historic upset, New York City elected 32-year-old progressive Zohran Mamdani as its youngest mayor ever, defeating the incumbent with a platform centered on universal childcare and aggressive anti-corruption measures. Mamdani's win, buoyed by a youth mobilization effort that registered 150,000 new voters under 30, signals a generational shift amid growing disillusionment with federal gridlock. Exit polls from CNN and AP revealed that 62% of voters cited the ongoing government shutdown as their top concern, with frustrations boiling over stalled Social Security payments for millions of seniors and halted research grants for universities battling emerging infectious diseases. That shutdown, now dragging into its agonizing 5th week and officially surpassing the 1995-96 record as the longest in American history, continues to cast a long shadow over daily life and the economy. President Trump escalated his rhetoric today during a fiery Rose Garden presser, branding Democratic leaders as kamikaze pilots willing to crash the entire nation by rejecting his latest funding proposal, which included steep cuts to environmental regulations in exchange for border wall extensions. With over 800,000 federal employees still furloughed, many resorting to food banks and gig economy side hustles, national parks like Yellowstone remain shuttered, denying access to fall foliage seekers and costing local economies an estimated $1.2 billion in lost tourism revenue. Disaster relief for hurricane-battered Florida and Texas sits in limbo, exacerbating recovery efforts where floodwaters have yet to fully recede, and air traffic controllers are working overtime without pay, leading to a 15% spike in flight delays nationwide. Bipartisan talks are slated to resume tomorrow at the Capitol, but with fresh midterm energy empowering opposition voices, analysts from the Brookings Institution predict no breakthrough before Thanksgiving, potentially amplifying inflation pressures as supply chains for everything from holiday toys to prescription drugs grind slower. In a development with profound economic stakes, the U.S. Supreme Court today heard nearly 3 hours of intense oral arguments in a landmark case challenging the Trump administration's aggressive tariff regime, invoked under the obscure 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Justices across the ideological spectrum, including conservative stalwarts like Clarence Thomas and liberal voices such as Sonia Sotomayor, probed the administration's lawyers on the law's outer limits, questioning whether unilateral duties on $500 billion worth of imports from China, Mexico, and the European Union truly qualify as national emergencies tied to vague threats like intellectual property theft and migration surges. The tariffs, rolled out in waves since 2018, have jacked up costs for American consumers by an average of $1,200 per household annually, per a new Federal Reserve study, while propping up domestic steel and aluminum sectors but hammering exporters like farmers in Iowa and Ohio. A favorable ruling for the White House could greenlight even broader trade barriers, but critics, including a coalition of 200 economists, warn it risks igniting retaliatory measures that could shave 0.5% off U.S. GDP next year. For our northern neighbors, the implications are immediate and stark. Canada's auto industry, which sends 80% of its vehicles south, faces potential 25% surcharges that could idle factories in Ontario and add $2,000 to the sticker price of a Ford F-150. Turning northward, Canada is charting its own bold economic course under new Prime Minister Mark Carney, who today tabled his inaugural federal budget in Parliament, a sweeping 450-page document he hailed as a generational compact to fortify the country against volatility from south of the border and beyond. Titled Resilient Horizons, the plan commits a staggering $141 billion in fresh investments over the next 5 years, targeting everything from high-speed rail links between Toronto and Montreal to subsidies for quantum computing hubs in Waterloo, all while trimming $51 billion in efficiencies, such as streamlining the federal bureaucracy by 10% through AI-driven automation and phasing out outdated subsidies for fossil fuel exploration. Despite projecting a hefty $79.8 billion deficit for fiscal 2025, driven by pandemic-era debt servicing, the budget forecasts a return to surplus by 2030, thanks to revenue boosts from a progressive carbon pricing overhaul expected to generate $15 billion annually. Carney, drawing on his Bank of England pedigree, spotlighted a trade diversification accelerator to reroute 20% of exports away from the U.S. toward Asia and Europe, including fast-tracked free trade pacts with India and Brazil, and a dramatic doubling of defense outlays to $38 billion yearly to meet NATO's 2% GDP pledge, funding new Arctic patrol vessels amid Russia's saber-rattling. In a nod to housing woes, $20 billion will flow to affordable builds in Vancouver and Calgary, aiming to construct 100,000 units by 2028 and tame the 7% year-over-year rent hikes plaguing urban millennials. Echoing these tensions, Canadian trade officials conducted a closed-door briefing this afternoon for industry leaders on contingency plans for U.S. tariff escalations, revealing simulations that predict a 12% drop in cross-border energy flows if duties spike, potentially blacking out parts of the Maritimes during peak winter demand. British Columbia's Premier David Eby, in a surprise pivot, shelved a $5 million public ad blitz against American protectionism, calling it counterproductive in favor of back-channel talks with U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, even as Alberta's oil sands operators lobby Ottawa for $3 billion in emergency export credits to weather the storm. That's your in-depth briefing for tonight, capturing the pulse of North American affairs with the clarity and context you deserve. From electoral triumphs to budgetary blueprints, these stories underscore a continent at a crossroads, resilient yet tested. If this breakdown sparked your interest or debate, do me a favor, smash that like button to show your support, subscribe for these daily deep dives straight to your feed, and jump into the comments. What's your hottest take on Carney's deficit gamble or the shutdown's human toll? Your insights fuel the dialogue, so let's hear them. Thanks for joining me. Stay informed, stay engaged, and have a thoughtful evening.